She's lost her mind, officer. She has severe PTSD. She just got back from a war zone, and she's threatening to kill herself. Please handcuff her and lock her up in a psych ward right now." The broken, tear-drenched voice of Vanessa, my own, flesh and blood sister, pierced through the dead of night. But the exact second the officer turned his back to grab his handcuffs, Vanessa looked me dead in the eye. The corner of her mouth curled into a smug, triumphant smirk as she soundlessly mouthed the words, "You're done. Your house and your money are mine." I had been back from a combat zone in the Middle East for exactly 48 hours. I've taken shrapnel to the shoulder to shield a squad mate, but I had never felt pain quite like this. My own flesh and blood had called the cops to my door at 3:07 a.m., trying to use a 5150 hold to get me locked away in a psychiatric hospital. But they made one fatal mistake. Before I tell you guys how I turned the tables on them, please take a second to hit that like and subscribe button, but only if you're actually enjoying the story so far. Also drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. The blinding strobe of red and blue police lights bounced off the cracked plaster of my living room walls. This house wasn't just wood and drywall. I paid for every square foot of it with hazard pay. It was bought with the sweat of 15-hour shifts in a trauma tent pulling shrapnel out of kids barely old enough to buy a beer. And now my own sister was standing out on my lawn trying to use the cops as a cheap eviction service. The air in the entryway was thick and bitter. Freezing wind whipped in off Lake Michigan, cutting right through my thin cotton shirt and biting into the fresh surgical scar on my left shoulder. It throbbed, a dull rhythmic ache. The patrol cop took a heavy step forward over the threshold. His leather duty boots squeaked violently against my hardwood floor. His right hand rested firmly on his belt, his fingers brushing the cold, heavy steel of his handcuffs. He was a young guy, tense jaw, high adrenaline. His eyes were wide, scanning the shadows. He was fully prepped to tackle a deranged, suicidal veteran to the floor. The air between us hung heavy. The cop's flashlight beam cut through the dust motes floating in the dark hallway. I could hear his radio crackling with static. Dispatch checking in. He ignored it. He was trying to read me. I let him look. I gave him nothing. No twitch, no heavy breathing, no trembling hands. I didn't take a step back. I didn't throw my hands up in the air. I didn't beg, plead, or scream that I was fine. My heels snapped together. My spine locked perfectly straight. My hands rested flat and still against the outer seams of my jeans. "Officer," I said. My voice was a flat, low baritone, not a single hint of panic. "Your flashlight is blinding me. Lower it." The command wasn't a request. It was pure, drilled instinct. The cop froze. His boots stopped dead. Police Academy trains them to subdue erratic, screaming threats. They are taught to tackle chaos. They aren't trained to deal with a stone statue. The utter suffocating silence in my living room completely derailed his momentum. I kept my eyes locked on the silver badge pinned to his chest. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into the breast pocket of my jacket. I saw his hand twitch toward his holster. I ignored it. I pulled out my military ID and held it out, letting the harsh beam of his flashlight catch the holographic seal. "Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Clark." I stated, clipping my words short. "Resting heart rate is 72. Blood pressure is 118/76. 0 alcohol in my system. 0 narcotics. I am fully oriented to time, person, and place." The officer leaned in, squinting at the ID card. His eyes flicked from my face to the silver medical insignia stamped next to my rank. He swallowed hard. His fingers slowly slipped away from his holster. He looked at me, then looked out the open front door where Vanessa was still putting on her Broadway-level crying act, clutching her designer purse to her chest. He knew. "You worked the streets of Chicago long enough, you know what a scam looks like." The whole suicide script just disintegrated right on my front steps. Out on the frosted front lawn, Vanessa chewed on her lower lip. She was waiting for the show. She needed to hear the sound of a struggle, a crazy scream, the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. She needed me to lose my temper just once so they could justify that 5150 paperwork and drag me out in a straitjacket. I didn't give her a damn thing. I turned my back on the open door and walked straight into the kitchen. I could hear the dull hum of the refrigerator. The house felt violated. The smell of Vanessa's sickly sweet floral perfume still hung in the entryway, mixing with the sharp scent of the cold outside air. I hated that smell. It smelled like fake smiles and maxed out credit cards. The cheap linoleum was ice cold against my bare feet. I grabbed a heavy ceramic mug and poured a cup of black coffee from the pot I had brewed an hour ago. It was lukewarm. It tasted like bitter dirt and burnt acid. I drank it anyway. I stood leaning against the granite counter, taking a slow sip as the two EMTs packed up their rolling stretcher in my hallway. One of them, an older guy with bags under his eyes, pulled a clipboard from his heavy jacket. "Hoax call," he muttered, scribbling a thick black line across the dispatch paper. "Have a good night, Colonel." They rolled out. The cop gave an awkward nod, muttered a quick apology under his breath, and followed them into the freezing night. Through the front window, I watched the police cruisers kill their lights. The engines rumbled as they pulled away from the curb, leaving the street dead and quiet again. Out on the dead winter grass, Vanessa stood entirely alone. The cheap mascara she wore was smeared in thick, ugly black tracks down her cheeks. The fake tears had completely dried up. She looked at the empty street, realizing her golden ticket just drove off without me. She spun around on her high heels, making a fast break for her parked car. She stood frozen on the concrete walkway for a split second. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she realized her little master plan just imploded. I set the coffee mug down on the counter. The ceramic clinked sharply against the stone. I stepped out onto the front porch. The wind bit deep into my skin. "Vanessa," I called out. I didn't yell. The volume was just loud enough to cut through the rustling of the dead oak leaves in the yard. Just loud enough for her. She stopped dead in her tracks, her shoulders tensed up, going rigid under her overpriced trench coat. She slowly turned her head, looking back at me over her shoulder. The arrogant smirk was completely gone, replaced by a twitching, nervous energy. I didn't step off the porch. I looked at her smeared face, my expression completely hollow. "There's an infrared security camera tucked up in the ceiling corner of the entryway," I said, my voice dropping to a dead whisper. "It records in HD, and it captures lip movements." Vanessa's neck snapped rigid. Even under the dim orange glow of the street lamp, I watched the blood completely drain from her face. Her jaw went completely slack. The realization hit her like a brick to the teeth. The camera wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was a digital witness, and it had her dead to rights. She knew exactly what she had just mouthed to me 10 minutes ago, right under that lens. I didn't give her a chance to stutter. I didn't wait for her to scramble for a pathetic excuse. I stepped backward into the house. I grabbed the heavy oak door and slammed it shut, the sound echoing through the quiet suburban street like a gunshot. I threw the steel deadbolt into place with a loud final click. The war wasn't over. It just started. I did not walk away from the front door right away. I stood alone in the dark hallway, listening to the heavy silence of the house. The deadbolt was locked. The house was secured. I walked straight past the living room and sat down at the heavy oak dining table. I flipped open my laptop. The harsh blue light hit my face, casting sharp shadows against the walls. I rolled my neck, feeling the joints pop. I flexed my left shoulder. The thick shrapnel scar under my shirt pulled tight against the muscle. A dull, burning ache. The kind of pain that reminds you exactly what you survived. I pulled up the Cook County Court portal. You do not just send a squad car to a house at 3 a.m. with EMTs in tow without a massive paper trail. Somebody had to sign off on this circus. I typed in my own name, hit search. A file populated on the screen. Filed yesterday afternoon at 4:15 p.m. Emergency 5150 psychiatric hold. I clicked it. The PDF loaded line by line. There was a clinical evaluation attached, stamped and signed by a Dr. Elias Aris. The report stated I was severely unstable, suffering from combat-induced delusions, a direct threat to myself. I had never seen this man a day in my life. A fake doctor drumming up a fake emergency. But the lie on that medical form was not the thing that drove a spike through my chest. I scrolled down to the bottom of page 3, section labeled Authorizing Next of Kin. Right there on the dotted line, a neat looping signature in blue ink. Martha Clark, my mother. That signature dragged me backward, 20 years backward, straight into the cramped, peeling kitchen of my childhood home in the Chicago suburbs. I could still smell the stale air. I could smell the cheap fryer grease permanently baked into my clothes. I was 18 years old. I had just walked through the back door after a grueling 10-hour shift bussing tables at a rundown roadside diner. The arches of my feet were screaming in pain. My knuckles were cracked, smelling like industrial bleach and dirty dishwater. I stood at the sticky Formica kitchen counter, emptying my apron pockets. I was carefully flattening out crumpled, grease-stained $1 bills. My tips, my bus fare, my way out. My mother walked into the kitchen. She did not ask if I was tired. She did not ask if I'd eaten a meal today. She walked right past me holding a brand new red silk formal dress against her chest. Bought for Vanessa. She reached out and scooped up my stack of dollar bills right off the counter. Every single dollar. I just stared at her empty hands. She did not flinch. She did not apologize. She just offered a cold, hollow smile. You are strong, Sophia. You can handle a little hard work. Your sister needs to shine. That was the golden rule of the Clark family. I bled and Vanessa shined. I was always the one paying the physical toll for her high-maintenance fake reality. The memory shifted violently. Cold wind biting my face, the smell of diesel exhaust. The gray concrete platform of the Amtrak train station. The day I shipped out for basic training. I stood there entirely alone, the heavy canvas strap of my military duffel bag digging into my collarbone. The platform was a ghost town. Other young recruits had families crowding around them, mothers crying into tissues, fathers shaking hands and slapping backs. I stared at my cheap flip phone. The screen was blank. My parents did not show up to see me off to war. They were too busy hosting a backyard barbecue for Trent, the loudmouth, fake Rolex-wearing real estate broker Vanessa had just started dating. To them, my shipping out to a combat zone was just a mild scheduling conflict. They only remembered my phone number on the 1st of the month, the exact day my military pay hit my checking account. The phone would ring, a sweet, high-pitched voice asking for a little help with the bills. I was not a daughter. I was an ATM wrapped in camouflage, a walking emergency fund made of flesh and bone. I blinked hard. The blinding glare of the laptop screen pulled me out of the garbage of the past. The blue light reflected in my cold eyes. I was done being a victim of my own memories. I opened a second tab on the browser. I bypassed the standard folders and logged into my secure encrypted drive. I pulled up the scanned legal document my grandfather left behind. The trust fund. $4.2 million. I scrolled straight to Section B, the contingency clause. In the event the primary beneficiary is deemed medically or psychiatrically unfit, full financial control shall transfer to the immediate next of kin. I stared at the black letters on the glowing screen. The truth locked into place like a heavy steel magazine sliding into a rifle. My family did not call the police at 3 a.m. because they were worried about my mental health. They did not care if I lived or died in the desert. They were picking the lock to a $4 million safe. If you have ever felt this kind of betrayal, you know the cold, suffocating emptiness that comes with it. Have you ever been the family ATM? The one who works until your hands bleed, only to be used and discarded by the people who are supposed to protect you? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We survivors need to stick together. I did not cry. My heart rate did not spike. My hands did not shake. I reached inside my shirt and gripped the cold metal of my dog tags resting against my chest. They thought a tired, broken soldier would just roll over and take the sedatives. They thought they could isolate me and crush me under the weight of a fake medical report. They were dead wrong. I reached across the table and grabbed my cell phone. The house was dead quiet. Just the low mechanical hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen island staring at the blue glare of my laptop screen. The trust fund document was still open in the second tab. $4.2 million. That was the prize. Now I needed to find the motive. Why tonight? Why the sudden sloppy rush to lock me in a psych ward? People do not panic like that unless they are drowning. I opened a new terminal window. During my deployments, I ran medical logistics and personnel background checks. I still had the login credentials to a few secure federal databases, the kind of databases that sliced right through civilian privacy walls. I typed in the target, Trent Holloway, my sister's husband, a guy who wore cheap suits, slicked his hair back with too much gel, and called himself a wealth creator. I hit enter. The screen flooded with data, credit history, tax returns, bank statements. I did not read it like a civilian. I read it like a battlefield map. I was looking for the ambush. It took me less than 3 minutes to find it. Trent had set up a bogus real estate investment fund, a classic shell company. He printed glossy brochures, hyped up commercial properties he did not own, and took cash from private investors. He promised them a 20% return. He did not buy property. He bought chips. I traced the wire transfers, offshore accounts, high-stakes underground sports betting, VIP tables in Vegas. Trent had taken millions of dollars of other people's money and burned it all at the blackjack table. I scrolled down to the bottom line, the final glaring deficit, $1.8 million. That was his debt. And it was not owed to a bank. You do not get a collection letter in the mail for that kind of money. You get a guy waiting in the backseat of your car with a loaded gun. Trent had a target painted right on his forehead, $1.8 million. My brain automatically converted that number into a physical cost. 1.8 million was 15 years of my life. It was 15 years of choking down dry, tasteless field rations in the middle of a blazing desert. It was standing on my feet for 48 hours straight inside a forward surgical team tent operating on torn bodies while artillery fire shook the ground. It was the copper smell of human blood soaking completely through the sleeves of my scrubs. It was the jagged piece of hot shrapnel that ripped through my left shoulder, missing my main artery by less than 1/4 of an inch. I traded my youth, my blood, and my sanity to build a life. Trent destroyed a fortune with a few clicks of a mouse and a cocktail in his hand. My jaw locked tight. I clicked the cursor again, pulling up the associated guarantors on his accounts. I needed to see who was stupid enough to co-sign for a drowning man. A new PDF loaded, a property deed, a second mortgage. My chest stopped moving. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thin to breathe. 6 months ago, Robert and Martha Clark walked into a bank. They put up the suburban house they had lived in for 30 years as collateral. My parents took out a massive equity loan to bail out their deadbeat son-in-law. They were in on it. They were bleeding out right alongside him. The math finally made perfect, sickening sense. The bank was coming for my parents' house. The underground bookies were coming for Trent's kneecaps. They needed cash, and they needed it yesterday. But they could not just ask me for it. They knew I would never give Trent a single dime. So they decided to take it. They decided to label me insane, strip away my civil rights, lock me in a padded room, and legally hijack my $4 million trust fund. My own mother and father sold my life to buy back Trent's. I did not scream. I did not throw the coffee mug against the wall. Rage is a useless emotion if you do not focus it. I reached up and closed the laptop. The screen went black. The kitchen plunged back into the dark. I slipped my calloused hand under the collar of my shirt. My fingers wrapped around my cold metal dog tags. The military gave me these tags to identify my body if I died in the dirt. They were the only real identity I had left. My family thought I was an easy target. They thought because I lived alone, because I did not have a husband or kids, that I was isolated. They thought my isolation made me weak. They thought they could corner me in the dark and quietly erase me. They made a massive tactical error. Isolation is not my weakness. It is my operating environment. I survived in the worst places on Earth, surrounded by nothing but hostile forces. I knew exactly how to fight in the dark. They wanted a war. They just declared it on the wrong soldier. I let go of the dog tags. The metal clinked softly against my chest. I reached across the dark counter and picked up my cell phone. The digital clock on the microwave glowed neon green in the pitch-black kitchen. 4:12 a.m. The house was freezing. I had not touched the thermostat since I got back from the sandbox. I liked the bitter cold. It kept my blood moving. It kept my head sharp. I sat alone at the granite kitchen island, staring at the blank screen of my cell phone. I reached out and picked it up. The heavy aluminum case felt like a block of ice against my calloused palm. I bypassed my personal contacts list. I did not need a shoulder to cry on tonight. I did not need a friend. I needed an attack dog. I punched in a 12-digit encrypted internal number. It rang exactly twice. Hale. The voice on the other end of the line was rough, gravelly, and wide awake. Marcus Hale, Criminal Investigation Division, Financial Crimes Unit. A guy who wore scuffed leather jackets to the federal building and spoke exclusively in the cold language of bank records and federal indictments. Marcus, it is Clark. Colonel, you are supposed to be on medical leave. Change of plans, I said. My voice was completely flat-stripped of any panic. I have a situation on the home front. My civilian family is currently executing a hostile takeover of a private trust fund. $4.2 million. They weaponized a 5150 psychiatric hold to try and force medical power of attorney. Trent Holloway is the primary architect. They sent squad cars to my front porch an hour ago. I did not soften the blow. I did not sugarcoat it with tears, and I did not ask for pity. Between soldiers, you do not waste oxygen on pride. You deliver the raw, ugly truth and let the chips fall where they may. Through the receiver, I heard the rapid, aggressive clacking of his mechanical keyboard stop dead. Total silence on the secure line. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Marcus did not ask if I was actually suicidal. He did not ask if I was having a breakdown. He did not ask for my side of the story to verify the facts. I will be at my desk at the federal building in 15 minutes, Marcus said. His voice was heavy iron, cold, absolute, and utterly terrifying if you were on the wrong side of it. Do you need me to freeze all of their civilian bank accounts right now, Colonel? No hesitation, not a single trace of doubt. I closed my eyes. For the first time since I stepped off that military transport plane, the crushing, suffocating weight sitting on my chest lifted. My lungs expanded, pulling in a deep, shaking breath. A sudden rush of heat traveled down my spine, fighting off the bitter chill of the room. This was the safety I had never felt inside this house. My own mother and father called the cops in the middle of the night to lock me in a padded room so they could steal my blood money. But this man, a guy with zero shared DNA, was ready to burn down the financial lives of my enemies just because I gave the word. Not yet, Marcus. I need the full paper trail first. Get everything you can on Trent Holloway. Real estate fraud, underground gambling debts. Do not spook them yet. Copy that. Holloway is a dead man walking. I will lock down the data. The line went dead. I set the phone down on the counter. My throat felt incredibly tight. The back of my eyes burned with a sudden fierce heat. 5 minutes later, the phone vibrated against the stone. A different number. Washington, D.C. area code. I swiped the screen. Clark. Sophia. It is Colonel Harris. Judge Advocate General's Corps. The military's legal heavy artillery. Marcus woke me up, Harris said. His tone was not loud, but it carried the kind of federal authority that crushed civilian courts for a living. We have already reviewed the legal loopholes regarding the emergency conservatorship. Those civilian parasites cannot touch a single hair on one of our officers. The FBI field office in Chicago is being looped in as we speak. You are not fighting this alone, Sophia. I swallowed hard. The burning in my eyes turned to a sharp physical sting. Blood is absolutely nothing. Blood is just a biological accident. You do not get to pick the people who share your last name. But loyalty. Loyalty is a choice. And this loyalty, this ruthless, absolute protection, was my real family. Thank you, sir, I whispered. It was the only crack in my armor all night. Get some rest, Colonel. We have hunting to do tomorrow. Harris hung up. I stood up from the stool. I walked into the living room and stared out the large bay window. The black water of Lake Michigan was churning in the distance, violently crashing against the concrete breakwater. I was not alone anymore. I had the entire weight of the United States military standing right behind my back. The sudden, piercing shriek of the landline phone shattered the quiet of the house. I did not jump. I just turned my head. The old plastic phone was mounted on the kitchen wall. The caller ID screen flashed a bright, obnoxious orange in the dark. Martha Clark. I stared at the name. The woman who signed my freedom away just a few hours ago. I walked over slowly. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. I did not speak. Sophia, sweetheart. Her voice oozed out of the cheap plastic speaker. It was thick, wet, and sickeningly sweet, poison wrapped in honey. It was the exact same tone she used when she needed a favor. I am here, I said flatly. Oh, good. You know, your father and I were just talking. We miss you so much. Why do you not come over to the house for dinner this weekend? I am going to make that garlic butter steak you love so much. Garlic butter. I have been violently allergic to garlic since I was 15 years old. She did not even know me. She had no idea what I loved or hated. She just wanted me in the room. They were setting the table for an ambush. They needed me cornered so they could shove those legal papers in my face. I stared at the blank drywall. My face was a stone mask. Yes, I answered, my voice dead calm. I will be there. She hung up, probably smiling in her suburban kitchen, thinking she had just successfully baited the trap. She had absolutely no idea I was the one holding the detonator. Saturday night, 7 p.m. I parked my truck halfway down the street. I did not park in the driveway. You never park your vehicle where you can get boxed in. Basic situational awareness. I walked up the concrete path to my parents' house. The front door was unlocked. They were expecting me. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air inside the house was thick, heavy. It smelled like cheap boxed Cabernet and roasted garlic. I walked past the living room and stepped straight into the formal dining room. I did not slouch. I did not casually lean against the door frame. I stood at the edge of the room with my shoulders squared, scanning the space like a commander inspecting a hostile zone. The setup was almost comical, a perfectly rehearsed stage play. Trent was sitting right at the head of the heavy oak dining table. That was my father's chair, the seat of authority. Trent was sprawling his arms out, aggressively adjusting the cheap knockoff Rolex on his left wrist. He was trying to project power. He just looked like a desperate man sweating through a cheap dress shirt. Vanessa was sitting to his right. She flashed a tight plastic smile, aggressively pushing a heavy ceramic bowl of tossed salad toward the center of the table. My mother, Martha, was fluttering around the table like a nervous bird, pouring dark red wine into oversized glasses. No one said a word about the flashing police lights on my front lawn a few nights ago. No one mentioned the ambulance, or the fake suicide call, or the fact that my own sister tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward at 3 a.m. They operated on absolute delusion. If they did not talk about it, it did not happen. My father, Robert, was sitting quietly on the side. He kept his eyes glued to his plate. He sawed a large piece of meat with his steak knife. The serrated metal scraped hard against the white porcelain plate, a sharp screeching noise that cut right through my teeth. "Eat, Sophia," my father muttered, still refusing to make eye contact with me. "You look way too thin. You need to put some weight back on." I pulled a heavy wooden chair out and sat down. I did not pick up my silverware. I looked down at the plate sitting in front of me, a massive cut of ribeye steak. It was drowning in a thick yellow pool of melted garlic butter. Little roasted cloves of garlic were piled on top of the meat. I stared at the food. My chest felt hollow, not from sadness, from absolute disgust. I have been violently allergic to garlic since I was 15 years old. It closes up my throat in minutes. I spent 20 years sending them a chunk of my military paycheck on the first of every month. I paid their mortgage. I funded their vacations. And nobody in this house possessed the basic human decency to remember a detail that could actually kill me. They did not know me. They were completely empty regarding my existence. I pushed the plate exactly 2 inches away from me. I interlaced my calloused fingers together and placed them flat on the edge of the table. "Get to it," I said. My voice was a flat, dead calm in the noisy room. "You did not invite me here to chew meat." The clinking of silverware stopped dead. The fake smiles vanished. The tension in the room instantly snapped tight like a piano wire. Trent coughed, a loud, wet sound. He reached down and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, slapping it down onto the oak wood. He slid it directly across the table toward me. I looked down. The bold black letters at the top of the page screamed exactly what this dinner was about: medical and financial power of attorney. We just want to help you carry the load, Trent said. His voice cracked slightly. The left corner of his mouth twitched. He was trying to sound like a savior, but his eyes were darting around the room like a cornered rat. My mother leaned over the table. She reached her hand out, trying to rub my left shoulder, the exact shoulder where the shrapnel scar was still healing. I shifted my weight back, avoiding her touch. Just sign it, sweetie, she pleaded. Her voice was drenched in fake, suffocating sympathy. Family will take care of you. You are sick. My father tapped his fork sharply against the table, finally looking up with a pathetic glare of dusty patriarchal authority. Stop being stubborn, Sophia. Best for everyone. I kept my hands folded. I looked directly at Trent. I watched a thick, cloudy drop of sweat roll down his left temple and soak right into his collar. He was desperate. The underground bookies were breathing down his neck for their $1.8 million. He needed my signature on that paper tonight. He needed to walk into a bank tomorrow morning and legally drain my $4 million trust fund to save his own kneecaps. They were trying to rush me. They needed a fast, clean kill. I unclasped my hands. I reached across the table. Trent let out a sharp, dry exhale, thinking I was reaching for the pen sitting next to the document. I did not touch the pen. I grabbed the entire stack of legal papers. I folded them perfectly in half, creasing the thick paper with my thumb. I unzipped my tactical bag sitting on the floor and shoved the papers deep inside. I zipped it shut. I will take it with me, I said, my voice utterly void of emotion. My lawyer needs to read it. Vanessa's face went completely ghost white. Her plastic smile died instantly. The heavy silver steak knife slipped out of my father's hand and hit his porcelain plate with a loud clattering crash. Trent opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His jaw just hung there. They had planned a high-speed ambush. They thought they could bully a traumatized veteran into signing away her entire life over a plate of poisoned steak. But they forgot one basic rule of combat. Whoever controls the timeline controls the war. They just lost control of the time. I pushed my chair back. The wood scraped harshly against the floor. I stood up, turned my back on the silent room, and walked out the front door. Monday morning, 8:12 a.m. The rusted brakes of the USPS truck squealed to a halt right outside my front window. Heavy boots hit the concrete walkway. The mail carrier dropped a thick, heavy envelope into my metal mailbox. The lid slammed shut with a sharp, echoing clang. I walked out and grabbed it. It was thick, heavy manila paper, a certified mail sticker across the top, and right in the center, a bright red stamp from the Cook County Court. I stood in the cold hallway and ripped the top edge off. The thick paper tore with a loud, harsh rip. I pulled out a stack of stapled documents. Ex parte, emergency guardianship petition. Filed first thing this morning. They did not even wait for the weekend to end. I flipped to the second page. Attached to the filing was a flash drive. The petition stated it contained video evidence of my erratic behavior. They had pulled the footage from my own front porch camera. They cropped the audio. They chopped it up to only show the flashing police lights and the cops questioning me on the steps. They were trying to use a shadow court ruling. An ex parte hearing means the judge makes a decision without the defendant even being in the room. They wanted to strip my civil rights and drain my accounts while I was sitting on my living room couch, completely blind to the knife in my back. My phone buzzed against the granite kitchen counter, a harsh, vibrating rattle. The screen lit up. A new text message. Martha. I did not even have her saved as Mom anymore in my contacts. I picked up the heavy phone and read the glowing text. Martha here. Do not make things difficult, Sophia. Just be a good girl and sign the papers. If you try to fight this, you will only humiliate yourself in court. I read those words 3 times. There was zero love in that text. Zero hesitation. It was a ransom note from a terrorist. I looked at the screen and my mind flashed back to a dirt-walled bunker in the Middle East. I remembered pulling a crumpled photograph of my mother out of my tactical vest. I showed it to a bleeding 19-year-old kid I was patching up, telling him I was going to make it home to see my family. What a sick, twisted joke. That woman in the photo was dead. The text message on my screen just handed me her death certificate. The last tiny fraying thread of biological loyalty snapped. I did not type out a paragraph. I did not ask her how she could do this. I wiped every single ounce of weakness from my body. I tapped the glass screen and sent 4 words. See you in court. I dropped the phone. I walked straight to my desk and sat down. I pulled a heavy encrypted black USB drive from my pocket and shoved it into the side of my laptop. The machine chimed. Marcus Hale delivered. The folder was packed. I opened it and dragged every single file onto my desktop. Trent's illegal LLC formation documents. The bank statements showing the massive wire transfers to offshore gambling sites. The second mortgage paperwork with my parents' forged signatures covering his bad bets. The criminal background check on Dr. Elias Ayres, the fake doctor who signed my 5150 hold. I highlighted every single file. I compressed them into one single zip folder. I was building an armor-piercing round. Has your own mother or father ever threatened to ruin your reputation just to get what they wanted? Have you ever had a parent use your own struggles against you to protect the golden child? If you know exactly how cold this betrayal feels, type "betrayed" down in the comments right now. Hit the like button and subscribe. We do not let these toxic families win. Cut to downtown Chicago. Right at this exact second, inside a dark, overpriced mahogany steakhouse, Trent Holloway was probably leaning back in a leather booth. He was probably cutting the end off a thick Cuban cigar and lighting it. I could picture Vanessa sitting across from him, clinking a heavy glass of cheap red wine against his. They were celebrating. They thought that red-stamped piece of court paper was a pair of handcuffs. They thought they had successfully gagged me. They thought they won. Back in my quiet, freezing house, I opened a secure federal email client. I typed in the direct email address for Colonel Harris at JAG. I CC'd the lead investigative agent at the FBI Chicago field office. I dragged the zip file into the attachments box. The loading bar flashed blue, filling up in less than 3 seconds. I moved the mouse. I stared at the screen. My hand did not shake. I clicked send. The screen cleared. The data was gone. Airborne. I closed the laptop and pushed my chair back. I walked over to the front door, unlatched the heavy steel deadbolt, and stepped out onto the porch. The wind off the lake was brutal today. The Chicago sky was a flat, dead gray. I pulled a cigarette from my pocket. I struck a match against the brick wall. The flame flared up, cutting through the biting wind. I lit the end and took a long, slow drag. The smoke hit the back of my throat, bitter and harsh. I stood alone on the concrete steps, exhaling a thick cloud of smoke into the freezing air. The artillery was loaded. Wednesday morning. I stood in the cold bedroom. I reached past the civilian clothes hanging in the closet. I bypassed the denim and the soft cotton. I pulled out the heavy plastic garment bag. Class A uniform. I slipped my arms into the crisp, heavily starched green shirt. I buttoned it all the way up to the collar. I put on the jacket. The V-cut creases in the fabric were sharp enough to draw blood. I reached into a small wooden box on the dresser. I pushed the sharp needles of my ribbon rack through the thick fabric over my left breast. The military commendations lined up in perfect straight rows. Finally, I picked up the Bronze Star. The cold metal weighed heavy in my palm. I pinned it right in the center. Every piece of brass on this jacket felt like a piece of shrapnel I took for this country. My family wanted to strip me naked and label me insane. I was not going to wear civilian armor to this fight. I was wearing my honor. Cook County Courthouse. The lobby was a chaotic mess of public defenders and overworked bailiffs. The air smelled like cheap coffee and industrial floor wax. My boots hit the marble floor with a heavy thud. I did not look at the crowds. I turned the corner toward the third-floor elevators. Colonel Daniel Harris stood tall by the heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B. He wore his own dress uniform. Flanking him were 2 men in dark tailored suits. FBI field agents, black ties, clear plastic coiled earpieces running down the back of their necks. Nobody smiled. "Ready, Colonel?" Harris asked. I nodded. We fell into a wedge formation. I took the point, Harris on my right flank, the feds on my left and rear. We walked down the hallway. The heavy synchronized sound of our leather boots stomping against the old oak floorboards echoed off the plaster walls. The crowd physically backed away, parting for the suits and the brass. It sounded like a firing squad marching to the block. I pushed the heavy double doors open. Vanessa was sitting at the plaintiff's table, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. Trent sat next to her in a shiny gray suit. Next to them stood their hired gun, a slick, overpriced civilian lawyer with way too much product in his hair. Vanessa turned her head toward the doors. She saw the uniform. She saw the feds. Blood instantly drained from her face. Her jaw went slack. Trent froze. He stared at the federal agents, his eyes wide with absolute terror. The civilian lawyer did not read the room. He stood up, clearing his throat loudly. He held up a thick manila folder toward the bench. "Your Honor, we are here today to finalize the emergency guardianship," the lawyer projected. "We have the clinical evaluation right here from Dr. Elias Aris. He clearly states Ms. Clark's mental condition is a direct threat to—" He never finished the sentence. Colonel Harris stepped forward. He walked right past the wooden railing. He slammed his own heavy leather folder down on the plaintiff's table. Bang! The sound cracked like a gunshot. The lawyer flinched. Harris looked at the slick lawyer with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Dr. Aris is not present in this courtroom today." Harris stated, his voice low and booming. "Because Dr. Aris is currently wearing an orange jumpsuit in a federal holding cell." The courtroom stopped breathing. The lawyer blinked, his mouth opening and closing. "Excuse me." Harris reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small digital voice recorder and set it flat on the wooden table. He pressed play. A second of static hiss, then a shaking, terrified voice. "I didn't evaluate her." Elias Aris stammered through the tiny speaker. "Trent Holloway gave me $50,000 in cash. He said he needed her accounts frozen by Monday." Harris hit stop. The click echoed in the dead silence. I stood at parade rest. I watched the fake mask of morality shatter. At a frontline medical tent, I stayed awake for 48 hours straight, my hands buried in torn flesh, just to keep one young private breathing. Here in the safety of the suburbs, a civilian doctor took a bribe and spent 5 minutes typing on a keyboard to murder my civil rights. The civilian lawyer stared at the digital recorder. He looked at the feds. He looked at Trent. He quickly shoved his papers back into his leather briefcase. He snapped the latches shut. He physically took 3 large steps away from Trent Holloway. He was cutting his losses. Trent was hyperventilating. Vanessa was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles completely white. The legal shield was gone. Their hired gun was running. The fake doctor was locked up. The judge looked over his glasses, his face turning dark red. He banged his wooden gavel against the sound block. "Ms. Clark," the judge said, glaring at the plaintiff's table. "Do you have something to add to this record?" I unclasped my hands. I stepped up to the podium. It was time to talk about the money. I stepped through the swinging wooden gate. The brass hinges whined a low metallic groan. I walked up to the witness stand. I did not sit down in the wooden chair. I stood right behind the thick oak podium. I completely ignored the judge. I ignored the black robe and the heavy wooden bench. I locked my eyes straight onto my mother. Martha. She was sitting in the second row of the gallery. She shrank back against the hard wooden bench. She looked incredibly small. Her shoulders hunched. The expensive makeup on her face suddenly looked like cheap paint on a crumbling wall. I reached inside the breast pocket of my Class A uniform. I pulled out a thick stack of federal bank records. The FBI seal was stamped across the top page in bright, aggressive red ink. I dropped the stack onto the wood. It landed with a heavy, flat smack. "Trent Holloway owes $1.8 million, I said. My voice was a dead, flat baritone. It cut right through the stale air of the courtroom. He owes it to an illegal sports betting syndicate operating out of the South Side. He built a fraudulent real estate LLC. He used it to funnel private investor cash straight to offshore bookies." Trent's face turned the color of wet cement. He gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table so hard his knuckles went white. He opened his mouth to speak. He planted his hands on the table to push himself up. He barely got an inch off the chair. The federal agent standing right behind him placed a heavy flat palm directly onto Trent's shoulder. The agent shoved him hard, driving him right back down into the wood. The air rushed out of Trent's lungs with a pathetic wheeze. He stayed put. I kept my eyes locked on my mother. 6 months ago, Robert and Martha Clark walked into a commercial bank. They took out a second mortgage on their suburban house, the house they are sitting in right now. They put up their entire 30-year livelihood as collateral to bail out a degenerate gambler. My father dropped his head. He stared down at his scuffed loafers. He could not even look me in the eye. The shame was suffocating him. "This is not a medical hearing," I told the room. Every word hit like a sledgehammer. "This is a coordinated armed robbery." The judge leaned over his high bench. He pulled his reading glasses down his nose. His jaw was set tight. He flipped through the top pages of the FBI dossier, reading the cold, hard numbers. "They looked at my uniform and saw a printing press," I said. "They thought a combat veteran would be an easy mark. They thought I was tired from the sandbox. They thought they could just strap me to a gurney, pump me full of heavy sedatives, and legally raid my $4.2 million trust fund to save their own skin." I slowly turned my head. I looked directly at Vanessa. She was shaking. Her entire body vibrated under her expensive designer trench coat. Her perfectly manicured fingernails were digging deep into her own palms, trying to ground herself. "But you were too slow," I said to her. Vanessa stopped breathing. "I smelled the greed on you 3 months ago," I stated. "I saw the way you looked at my bank accounts, so I emptied them." Vanessa's eyes bulged out of her skull. The entire $4.2 million. I continued pacing my words to let every single syllable bleed into her brain, was transferred into an independent, irrevocable nonprofit organization. It funds titanium prosthetics for combat wounded veterans. The account is locked. It is bulletproof. Even if this court declares me clinically insane, right at this very second, you cannot touch a single dime. The illusion completely shattered. Vanessa's face twisted into an ugly, hollow mask of pure, unfiltered panic. She gasped for air like she was choking on a bone. Trent sat completely paralyzed. His mouth hung open. His chest heaved. He knew exactly what was waiting for him outside this building. The bookies, the debt, the loaded guns in dark parking lots. In the gallery, my parents just deflated. All the blood left their faces. The reality finally crushed them. They had burned their relationship with their only loyal daughter. They were about to lose their house to the bank. They had absolutely nothing left. The judge picked up his wooden gavel. He did not ask for closing arguments. He did not ask for a rebuttal. He had seen enough. Bang! The sound cracked through the room, sharp and deafening. "The petition is denied in its entirety." The judge barked, his voice dripping with disgust. He looked past the table, nodding directly at the federal agents. "Law enforcement, do your jobs." 2 FBI agents stepped forward in perfect unison. They grabbed Trent by the arms, dragging his dead weight out of the wooden chair. A third agent moved in on Vanessa. She snapped. She tried to pull away. She thrashed her shoulders, kicking her expensive heels against the table leg. The agent did not care. He grabbed her wrists, twisted them roughly behind her back, and pulled the cold steel handcuffs from his leather belt. Click, clack. The heavy steel teeth locked tight over her wrist bones. Vanessa threw her head back and let out a high-pitched, deafening shriek. She squealed exactly like a stuck pig. The sound bounced violently off the hard plaster walls. "No! You cannot do this, Mom. Do something, Sophia. You bitch." Trent just stumbled forward, staring blankly at the floor as the agent shoved him toward the heavy wooden doors. I did not flinch. I did not smile. I just stood there on the podium. I clasped my hands behind my back, perfectly at ease, a cold steel statue. I watched them drag my own flesh and blood out of the courtroom. The screaming echoed down the hall. I turned and walked toward the double doors. The real war was over. Now I just had to step out into the corridor and sweep up the trash. I walked out of the heavy double doors of courtroom 3B. I did not look back. I did not need to see the federal agents pushing Trent and Vanessa toward the holding cells. The echoing sound of Vanessa screaming down the adjacent corridor was already fading into the background noise. My boots hit the polished marble floor. A steady rhythmic march, left, right, left, right. The courthouse hallway was packed. Overworked public defenders holding cheap coffee cups. Nervous defendants sweating through ill-fitting suits. Tired bailiffs leaning against the plaster walls. They all stepped aside. They saw the uniform. They saw the posture. You do not get in the way of a soldier walking with a purpose. I was 10 feet away from the main exit when a hand grabbed my left arm. Hard. Desperate. Digging right into the dark green fabric of my Class A uniform jacket. I stopped dead. I looked down at the hand. The knuckles were stark white. The palm was damp. Martha. My mother. Her face was a total wreck. The expensive foundation she applied this morning was melting. Mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, ugly black streaks, catching in the deep wrinkles around her mouth. She was breathing heavy, panting like a cornered animal. The smell of her sickly sweet floral perfume mixed with the sour stench of pure panic. "Sophia, please," she gasped out. Her chest heaved. "Please, you have to talk to the judge. Tell them you made a mistake. Pull back those FBI financial reports. You are ruining Vanessa's life." I stared at her face. Not a single word of apology. Not 1 ounce of regret for calling a squad car to my house at 3 in the morning. 3 days ago, she authorized a fake doctor to lock me in a psychiatric ward. Now her golden child was in handcuffs, and I was just the tool she needed to fix her broken reality. I looked down at the sweaty fingers clutching my sleeve. I did not jerk my arm away. I did not yell. I brought my right hand up. I grabbed her wrist. I slowly, deliberately peeled her clammy fingers off my uniform, one by one. I dropped her hand. It fell to her side like a dead weight. The person ruining Vanessa's life is the one who taught her that stealing from her sister was a birthright, I said. My voice was flat, a dead horizontal line. Zero anger, zero pity. I was talking to a stranger on the street. Martha physically recoiled. She stumbled backward a step, looking at me like she'd just touched a live wire. Heavy footsteps slapped against the marble behind her. "Robert." My father jogged up, his chest heaving under his wrinkled suit. His tie was crooked. The dusty fake authority he used to rule his suburban household was completely gone, but he tried to drag it out of the grave one last time. "You cannot do this," Robert barked, his face flushed deep red. He pointed a shaking finger at my chest. "I do not care what happened. At the end of the day, we are a family. Blood is the most important thing in this world, Sophia." Wendy, he tried to widen his eyes, trying to look intimidating, trying to act like the patriarch sitting at the head of the dining table. He just looked like a weak, desperate old man who was about to lose his house to the bank. I stared right through his pathetic act. I locked my eyes onto his. Family does not bribe a fake doctor to declare their own daughter insane, I stated. My words were sharp, heavy stones dropping onto the marble floor. Blood does not call the cops to my front porch at 3 in the morning to rob my bank accounts. Robert's jaw clamped shut. The shaking finger dropped. The illusion of his control shattered right there in the busy hallway. He had no leverage. He had nothing. Tears were actively pouring down Martha's face now. Real tears this time. Because the bank was coming for the deed. Because the ATM was officially broken and the cash was gone. "Sophia, please, I am begging you." She sobbed, reaching both hands out toward me again. "Mom is so sorry." "You do not get to call my name." I cut her off. I dropped my volume down to a dead whisper. It was sharper than a razor blade. Martha froze. Her mouth hung open. The tears stopped tracking down her cheeks. "You put a price tag on my life," I said, my voice cold and hollow. "You sat down and calculated exactly what my survival was worth to you. And that transaction is over." I did not wait for a response. There was nothing left to say. The tumor was cut out. The wound was cauterized. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the exit. I pushed the heavy brass-handled glass doors open and stepped out into the freezing Chicago air. The brutal wind whipped across the street, biting my face. A massive black federal SUV was idling right at the curb, the exhaust plumed thick and white in the cold. Colonel Harris was waiting in the passenger seat. I grabbed the heavy door handle. I stepped up into the back seat. I grabbed the interior panel and pulled it hard. The heavy steel and thick bulletproof glass slammed shut with a deafening solid thud. The fake tears, the gaslighting, the pathetic excuses of blood and family, all of it was permanently locked on the outside. The engine roared. The heavy tires gripped the asphalt. The truck pulled away from the curb. 3 months later, I stood by the second-floor window of the Chicago Veteran Rehabilitation Center. The air in the room smelled like harsh bleach and clean linen, a sharp chemical clean. It was a good smell. The morning sun cut straight through the thick glass, warming the heavy concrete floor beneath my boots. Down in the courtyard, a young Army private was sweating through a gray t-shirt. He gripped the parallel steel bars. He took a slow, agonizing step forward. His left leg was gone, replaced entirely by matte gray titanium. The hydraulic joints hissed quietly with every movement. My $4.2 million did not buy a country club membership. It did not cover the spread on a rigged football game for a low-level bookie. It did not fund a fake lifestyle for a golden child. It bought that titanium leg. It bought metal wiring and a second chance for the people who actually bled for this country. I turned away from the glass. I walked back to my steel desk and sat down. My computer monitor was glowing in the dim corner of the office. I scrolled through a local county records database. Public information. The bank had finally dropped the heavy iron hammer. Robert and Martha Clark foreclosed. The 3-bedroom suburban house with the manicured lawn and the heavy oak dining table was officially gone. The bank seized the deed last Tuesday. They packed whatever fit into 3 cheap plastic suitcases. They moved into a roadside motel out by the interstate. The kind of place with a flickering neon vacancy sign, stained carpets, and 0 room service. The fake suburban royalty was dead. Vanessa and Trent were not packing any bags. They were currently sitting in a federal holding facility. 2 matching orange jumpsuits. Trent was looking at 8 to 10 years for the wire fraud and illegal money movement. Vanessa was facing 5 for conspiracy and forgery. They dug their own graves with a golden shovel. They just expected me to jump into the hole and pay for the dirt. I moved the mouse. I hovered the white cursor over the small red X on the Internet browser tab. I clicked it. The screen went blank. Erased. The heavy wooden door to my office clicked open. My medical assistant, Sarah, stepped inside. She was young, fresh out of nursing school. She held a black cordless phone tightly against her chest. She shifted her weight, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "Colonel," Sarah said quietly. I did not look up. I kept my eyes locked on the thick medical file open on my desk. I uncapped a yellow marker. I dragged the highlighter across a series of blood panel numbers. The felt tip scratched roughly against the thick paper. "What is it, Sarah?" "There is a woman on line 3, she said. Her voice wavered slightly. "She's crying hysterically. She says her name is Martha. She says she is your mother. She told me they got evicted from their motel this morning, and she has absolutely nowhere to go. She's begging to speak with you." My hand did not stop moving. The yellow marker drew a perfectly straight line across the page. Down the hall, the heart monitor in the adjacent recovery room beeped. A slow, steady rhythm. The sound of a strong pulse. The sound of survival. The old shrapnel scar on my left shoulder ached in the cold air conditioning. A dull throb. It was a permanent mark. It was a reminder. But it was not a weakness anymore. It was not a target they could aim at. "Sarah," I said. My voice was completely flat, empty. A horizontal line. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel a trace of anger. I felt absolutely nothing. "Yes, ma'am." "Tell the front desk to block the number." I turned the page of the medical file. "I do not have a family." Sarah did not hesitate. She did not ask a single question. She nodded once. She pressed the red button on the receiver. Click. The connection was completely severed. Absolute silence filled the office. The dark cloud was gone. Blind loyalty is a fatal disease. The people who tell you that blood is thicker than water are usually the exact same people trying to drown you in it. The most dangerous enemy in the world does not wear an enemy uniform. They do not hide in a concrete bunker in the desert. They sit right next to you at the Sunday dinner table. They wait for you to get tired. They wait for you to drop your heavy armor. And then they reach for the carving knife. The best revenge is not screaming at them. The best revenge is not destroying them. The best revenge is stripping away their power to hurt you. The best revenge is reducing their entire existence to a blank screen. I stood up from the steel desk. I grabbed my white medical coat off the back of the chair. I slid my arms into the sleeves and buttoned it up to my collar. I adjusted the fabric. Perfect, sharp lines. I turned my back on the empty desk. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the bright hallway to save the people who actually deserved it. Thank you for joining my journey. If you survived a toxic family, hit like, subscribe, and comment "Survivor" below. Your support means everything to me. I will see you in the next story.